My name is Naomi Rivera, and I'm 32 years old. What you're about to hear is a story of how I lost the people who were supposed to be my family when I was 13, and how I found a real one in the last place I expected. This isn't a story about forgiveness or second chances. It's about consequences. It's about what the word parent actually means. And before I tell you what happened at my medical school graduation, the one where my biological mother sat frozen in the third row while nearly 1,000 people listened to me thank the woman who truly raised me, I need to go back to where everything broke, back to Northside Children's Hospital, room 512, on a Friday morning in August, when I had just turned 13. I can still smell that room if I close my eyes. Sharp and aseptic, trying and failing to cover the sour, metallic scent of illness. The air conditioner hummed too loudly. The fluorescent lights buzzed like trapped insects. I was perched on the edge of the exam table in a thin paper gown that didn't close in the back, my feet swinging above the floor because I was too short to reach it. I remember focusing on a crack in the towel just to keep from crying, tracing its jagged path with my eyes like it was the most important thing in the world. Across from me stood Dr. Ethan Chen, pediatric oncologist. He had a calm voice and tired eyes, the kind of tired that comes from delivering news like this too many times. He'd just finished explaining my diagnosis to my parents, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. He explained that, thankfully, it was one of the more treatable childhood cancers. With modern chemotherapy protocols, my chances of survival were around 85 to 90%. Those are very good odds, he said gently. With treatment, Naomi has an excellent chance of growing up and living a full, normal life. My mother, Carol, sat in the plastic chair under the window, staring blankly at the blinds as if she could will herself somewhere else. My father, David, stood with his arms folded so tightly across his chest that his knuckles had gone white. My older sister, Hannah, 16 years old, brilliant, beautiful, always the star of our family, was leaning against the wall scrolling on her phone with her earbuds in, as if this were just another boring errand she'd been dragged along to. Dr. Chen tapped his tablet, bringing up a treatment plan. The protocol is intensive, he continued. We're talking about roughly 2 to 3 years of chemotherapy. The first month is called induction, and she'll need to be hospitalized for much of that. After that, we move into consolidation, and then maintenance phases. Those can be mostly outpatient, but she'll need frequent visits and regular blood work throughout. The first words out of my father's mouth were not about whether I would live. They were not about what we needed to do to fight this. The first words out of my father's mouth were how much. Dr. Chen hesitated, and I watched something flicker across his face. With your insurance, he said carefully, you'd be responsible for approximately 20% of the total cost over the full course of treatment. That could mean somewhere in the range of $60,000 to $100,000 out of pocket. I know that's a significant amount, but we have assistance programs, payment plans, and our financial counselors are excellent at finding solutions. My father let out this short, cold laugh that didn't sound like him at all. Or maybe it sounded exactly like him and I'd just never heard it before. You're telling me, he said, that we could be on the hook for $100,000 because she got sick, David. My mother murmured without looking at me. Please, sir, Dr. Chen said, managing to maintain his professionalism despite what must have been rising horror. I understand this is overwhelming, but I want to be very clear. Your daughter has a strong prognosis. This cancer is treatable with proper therapy. She is very likely to survive and thrive. We're talking about saving her life. Hannah is applying to colleges next year, my father said, as if Dr. Chen hadn't spoken at all. We've been planning on Ivy League since she was in diapers. Columbia, Yale, Princeton. She scored 1530 on her set last month. She has a real future ahead of her. He said it like my cancer was an inconvenience to their brochure perfect life, like I was a billing error that needed to be corrected. The room went quiet. Even the machines seemed to hold their breath. Dr. Chen glanced at me, his eyes softening with something that looked like grief, then looked back at my parents. We don't have to discuss financial details in front of Naomi, he said. We can step into another room and continue this conversation privately. She needs to understand reality. My father snapped. For the first time since the word leukemia had been spoken, he actually looked at me, really looked, and there was nothing in his eyes. No fear for his daughter, no love, no desperation to save me, just calculation, cold, practical calculation, like he was looking at a spreadsheet that didn't balance. We have $190,000 in Hannah's college fund, he said flatly. That money is her ticket to a real future. We are not burning it on hospital bills. Something inside my chest broke, and it had nothing to do with the cancer growing in my bones. There are other avenues, Dr. Chen said quickly, his composure starting to crack. State programs, charity care, Medicaid qualification. We can work extensively with the hospital's financial counseling office to find solutions. No child goes without treatment because of money at this hospital. We are not taking handouts. My mother cut in sharply. For the first time, her voice had some life in it, but it was offense, not concern. What would that look like? Begging the state for money, letting the neighbors find out we can't afford to take care of our own child. We have a reputation in this community. Dr. Chen stared at them both. His face had gone pale. What exactly are you suggesting? My father held my gaze for a long moment. I remember thinking desperately. Say you're kidding. Say you're angry and scared and you didn't mean any of this. Say something that sounds like a father who loves his daughter. She's 13. He said slowly, deliberately. She can be emancipated, made a ward of the state. Then she'd qualify for full Medicaid coverage. The government pays for everything. Our finances stay intact. Hannah's future stays intact. Everyone wins. At first, I didn't even process the words. I just watched his mouth move, waiting for a punchline that never came, waiting for someone to burst in and tell me this was some horrible test of character that my parents were failing spectacularly. You cannot be serious, Dr. Chen said, and the calm professional veneer shattered completely. We have another child to think about, my mother said, and now she sounded defensive, wounded, like she was the one being wronged in this situation. Hannah has potential. She's going to be someone important someday. We can't let this. She waved her hand vaguely in my direction without meeting my eyes. Destroy everything we've worked for. Everything we've sacrificed for. It wouldn't be fair to her. Mom, I whispered. My voice came out small, broken. I'm scared. For the first time all morning, she actually looked at me. Her eyes met mine. And for one desperate second, I thought I saw something human there. Something motherly fighting to surface. You'll get treatment, she said, and her voice was flat, practical, like she was explaining why a package would be delivered late. The doctor said the survival odds are good. You'll probably be fine. And when you're 18, you can figure out your own life. But we can't throw away your sister's future over this. Surely you can understand that. It's simply not fair to ask that of us. I'm your daughter, I said. My voice sounded pathetic, childish, desperate. And so is Hannah, my father barked. The difference is, she has a real shot at something. She's brilliant. She's driven. She could be a surgeon, a Supreme Court justice, anything she wants. You, he studied me like I was a disappointing report card he'd just been handed. You've always been average. Average grades, average effort, average everything. We're not sacrificing a promising life for an average one. That's just basic logic. Dr. Chen stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I'm going to ask you both to step out while I speak with Naomi alone. We're her parents. My mother protested. We have every right to be here. For the moment, Dr. Chen said, and his voice dropped to something ice cold. Please leave this room now, or I will contact hospital administration and child protective services immediately. This is not a negotiation. They left. My father's jaw was tight with anger. My mother's face was a mask of injured dignity. Hannah slid her phone into her back pocket and followed them out without once meeting my eyes. The door clicked shut behind her, and suddenly the room felt enormous and empty. Everything hit me at once. The word leukemia echoing in my skull. The statistics about survival that now felt meaningless. The fact that my parents had just calculated the value of my life and found me wanting. I started sobbing. Not the quiet, dignified crying you see in movies, but the ugly, gasping kind that makes it hard to breathe. That makes your whole body shake. That feels like drowning on dry land. Dr. Chen grabbed a box of tissues from the counter, dragged a chair over next to the exam table, and just sat there. He didn't tell me to calm down. He didn't tell me it would be okay. He just waited, a solid presence in the chaos, until I could inhale without choking. Naomi, he said quietly when I'd finally caught my breath. Listen to me carefully. What your parents just proposed is not okay. It is not legal, and it is not going to happen. I'm calling Child Protective Services right now. You are not leaving this hospital without a plan in place that protects you and ensures you receive treatment. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I could only nod, tears still streaming down my face. You have cancer, he continued. That's terrifying. The treatment ahead of you is going to be incredibly difficult, but your prognosis is genuinely good. And I promise you, Naomi, you are not going to go through this alone. I will personally make sure there are people around you who actually care about what happens to you, not because of what you might achieve or how much you cost, but because you are a child who deserves to be loved and protected. I promise you that. He kept that promise. Within an hour, a social worker named Olivia appeared in my room. She had a calm voice, a thick binder full of paperwork, and a fierce kindness in her eyes that made me feel like someone was finally on my side. Within 2 hours, I had been moved to a bright private room in the pediatric oncology wing and formally admitted as a patient. Within 3 hours, my parents had signed emergency custody surrender papers, transferring legal responsibility for me to the state of Illinois. They didn't say goodbye. They didn't hug me. They didn't look back. I watched the elevator doors close behind them and felt something inside me go quiet and cold. That first night in the oncology unit was the longest of my life. I lay under stiff hospital blankets, and for beeping every few seconds, Hoey lights leaking in under the door. Machines hummed and clicked around me like mechanical heartbeats. Somewhere down the hall, a child was crying. Nurses' shoes squeaked on linoleum in an endless rhythm. I wasn't afraid of dying. Not really, not yet. I was afraid that if I did die, nobody would care. Nobody would notice. I would just disappear, like I'd never existed at all. Around 9 that evening, the door opened and a woman in dark blue scrubs stepped in, pushing a small computer cart ahead of her. Hey there, Naomi, she said softly. Her voice was warm, unhurried. I'm Julia. I've got you tonight. Julia Rivera was 33 years old, a pediatric oncology nurse who'd been working that floor for nearly a decade. She had dark wavy hair pulled into a messy bun, tired but warm brown eyes, and laugh lines around her mouth that made you trust her instantly. She wasn't beautiful in any movie star way. She was better than that. She was solid, real, present. She checked my wristband, glanced at the monitors, adjusted something on the IV pump, and then she looked right at me. Not at the chart, not at the machines, at me. So, she said, on a scale from 1 to everything is completely awful. How are you doing right now? Everything is awful, I whispered. She nodded slowly, like this was a completely reasonable answer. I read your chart, she said. I also heard what happened today with your parents. She paused, searching for words. That was wrong, Naomi. What they did was deeply, profoundly wrong. And I am so sorry it happened to you. The tears started again. I had already cried more that day than in my entire life combined. And somehow there was still more. Julia didn't shush me or tell me to be strong or look on the bright side. She just handed me tissues, adjusted my bed so I was more comfortable, and waited. She had the gift of presence, of making you feel like your pain was being witnessed and honored. When I finally calmed down enough to speak, she said, I'm not going to sugarcoat anything for you. Treatment is going to be hard, really hard. You're going to feel a lot worse before you start feeling better, but you are absolutely capable of getting through it. And you're not doing it alone. Not as long as I'm working this floor. You don't even know me. I said, not yet, she replied, and something like a smile crossed her face. But give me a few nights. Much later, after her official rounds were done and the hallway had gone quiet, she came back to my room with a deck of cards. Do you know how to play? She asked. I shook my head. Perfect, she said, settling into the chair beside my bed. I get to teach you. And that way, when you inevitably start winning, I can take full credit. We played Go Fish and then wore until almost 1 in the morning. Between hands, she told me about her life. She was recently divorced, no kids. She lived in a small 2-bedroom house about 20 minutes from the hospital. She had an overweight orange cat named Moki who hated everyone in the world except her. She was obsessed with true crime podcasts and baked elaborate desserts. When she was stressed out, why oncology? I asked at one point, genuinely curious. Why would anyone choose to work surrounded by cancer and death and scared children? She looked down at the cards in her hands, and her expression shifted into something more serious. My little brother had leukemia when I was 19, she said. Same kind you have. He's completely fine now, married with 2 kids, annoyingly happy about everything. But I remember those years. I remember how terrifying it was. And I remember the nurses who made it survivable. The ones who saw us as people, not just patients. I wanted to be like them. The ones who really saw the families they were caring for. Did your parents leave him? I asked before I could stop myself. Julia's head snapped up. God, no, she said. My parents nearly lost their house paying for his treatment. They took out loans, worked extra jobs, sold things. My mom still tears up sometimes when medical bills arrive in the mail. Even now, even for routine things. But they would have gone bankrupt 10 times over before they ever walked away from him. She held my gaze, her eyes intense. That's what parents are supposed to do, Naomi. Real parents. The next 4 weeks were a blur of chemotherapy, blood transfusions, mouth sores that made eating agony, fevers that spiked without warning, and endless vital sign checks that interrupted what little sleep I could manage. Through all of it, Julia showed up. She advocated loudly when I was in pain, and a distracted resident tried to brush it off. She hunted down the one flavor of popsicle I could tolerate when everything else made me sick. She made me laugh on days when I thought I'd forgotten how to do anything but cry. My biological parents never visited. Not once. Not a phone call. Not a card. Not a single text message. Olivia, my social worker, told me gently that they'd signed full surrender papers. No more parental rights, no legal obligation, no required contact. They were free of me. I was not free of what they'd done. On day 29, when my initial induction round of chemotherapy was finally complete, Dr. Chen walked into my room with a rare genuine smile on his face. Your bone marrow biopsy looks great, he announced. You're in remission. We can transition you to outpatient treatment for the consolidation phase. Where will she go? Julia asked from the doorway. She wasn't even on shift that day, but she'd come by anyway, as she often did. Foster care, Olivia answered. There is a family we've worked with before who specializes in medically complex placements. They're good people. I'll take her, Julia said. The room went completely still. I'm certified, she continued, her voice steady and certain. I finished all the foster parent training a couple of years ago. Just never had a placement that worked out. I know the medications, the side effects, the treatment schedule. I can recognize the warning signs of complications. And she looked directly at me. If Naomi wants to, I would be honored to bring her home with me. Olivia frowned. Julia, this is a long-term situation. We're talking about 2 more years of chemotherapy, plus years of monitoring after that. This isn't a temporary placement. I know exactly what it means, Julia said. I also know what it feels like to be a scared kid in a hospital bed with no one in your corner. I have a spare room. I have a support system. And I want to do this. I really, truly want to do this. Both of them turned to look at me. Julia's eyes were steady and calm, not pitying, not uncertain, just hopeful. Open. Yes, I said. My voice shook. But the word was clear. Please. The paperwork took a week. Bureaucracy moves slowly, even for children who need homes. During that week, Julia brought in photographs of her house, a cozy living room with mismatched furniture that looked actually comfortable rather than just stylish, a tiny kitchen with cheerful yellow cabinets, a spare bedroom that was about to become mine. What color do you like? She asked one afternoon, sitting beside my bed with paint samples. Blue, I said. Dark blue, light blue, somewhere in between, like the sky right before it gets completely dark, I said. That deep blue that's almost purple. Sold, she said. We'll make it yours on December 1st. Exactly 4 weeks after I was diagnosed with cancer and abandoned by my family, Julia Rivera signed me out of Northside Children's Hospital as my official foster parent. She carried my single duffel bag, which now contained everything I owned in the world, and drove me to her small house on Willow Ridge Drive. She pushed open the front door. It smelled faintly of cinnamon and fresh laundry detergent. Warm and welcoming, and nothing like the antiseptic hospital air I'd grown used to. Welcome to what I call Casa del Chaos, she announced. Moki and I are absolutely delighted to have you join us. We climbed the narrow wooden stairs to the second floor, and she stopped in front of a door with a little paper star taped to it. Ready? She asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. She opened it. The walls were painted a soft dusky blue, exactly the shade I had described. A brand new twin bed sat beneath the window, made up with a beautiful quilt patterned with silver stars. A second-hand desk occupied the corner, topped with a lamp and a small potted plant. A bookshelf already held a collection of young adult novels, some graphic novels, and a blank sketchbook waiting to be filled. On the nightstand was a framed photograph of me and Julia from the hospital. One of the other nurses had snapped it during one of our late-night card games without us noticing. We were both laughing at something. Cards scattered between us. Welcome home, Naomi, Julia said quietly. I started crying again. But this time the tears weren't from fear or grief or abandonment. They were something else entirely, something I couldn't name. Like my body was finally releasing a tension it had been holding since the moment my parents walked out of that hospital room. Julia wrapped her arms around me and held on tight. You're safe here, she said into my hair. You are wanted, and I am not going anywhere. She kept that promise too. The next years were brutal in ways I couldn't have imagined. Chemotherapy doesn't care how loved you are. It destroyed my appetite, my hair, my ability to sleep. I vomited until I saw stars, until there was nothing left in my stomach but bile. I developed infections that landed me back in the hospital more times than I could count. Julia was there for every single appointment, every middle of the night fever, every terrifying moment. She learned how to flush my central line with the precision of a surgical nurse. She learned to recognize the earliest hint of an infection before it became dangerous. She learned how to argue with insurance companies and win. She taped funny motivational notes to my medication bottles that made me smile even on my worst days. She kept a 3-ring binder of every single lab result, organized chronologically, like it was sacred text. She worked 12-hour shifts at the hospital, came home exhausted beyond words, and still made sure I ate at least a few bites of something nutritious. When I lost my hair to the chemotherapy, she shaved her own head in solidarity. If anyone says anything about our matching hairstyles, she said, rubbing her newly buzzed scalp and grinning, we'll just tell them we're trendsetters ahead of our time. On my worst weeks, we didn't leave the couch. We watched cooking competition shows and made fun of contestants who mispronounced basic ingredients. On my better weeks, we went to the park near our house, and she pushed me in a wheelchair until I felt brave enough and strong enough to walk on my own again. We talked about everything. Her childhood, my favorite books, the way the nurses and doctors at the hospital formed their own little army, fiercely protective of the children in their care. One evening, about 6 months into my placement, Julia came home later than usual. She dropped her keys in the little bowl by the door and said, "Naomi, we need to talk." My stomach immediately clenched with familiar dread. "Are you sending me back?" Her face crumpled with pain. "Honey, no, absolutely not. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to scare you." She crossed the room quickly and sat across from me at the kitchen table. "I want to ask you about something important." "What?" She took a deep breath. "I want to adopt you permanently, not just foster care. I want you to be my daughter, officially. Legal papers, my last name, the whole thing. Only if you want that, of course. There's absolutely no pressure, but I need you to know that I think of you as my kid already. I have for a while now. I would be incredibly honored if the law could catch up to what my heart already knows." I stared at her. In my mind, I heard my father's voice telling me I was average. I saw my mother's eyes sliding away from me in that hospital room, unable to even look at what she was throwing away. "You actually want me?" I asked. Julia's eyes filled with tears. "Naomi, I already consider you my daughter. You have been my daughter in every way that matters since the day I brought you home. I would be so proud to make it official." I started crying too hard to form words. I just nodded, over and over, until she understood. Moki, deeply offended by all this emotion he wasn't the center of, jumped up onto the table and yelled angrily until we were both laughing through our tears. The adoption process took about 4 months. Home studies, court dates, more paperwork than my entire chemotherapy protocol. On my 14th birthday, a judge in a wood-paneled courtroom brought down a small wooden gavel and said, "Congratulations, Naomi Rivera." Julia squeezed my hand so hard it almost hurt. Her face was streaming with tears. That night, back in our little house, she gave me a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate necklace with a tiny silver star pendant. "For my star girl," she said, fastening around my neck. "You're officially stuck with me now, forever." Chemotherapy ended when I was 15. My hair started growing back in strange new curls that bore no resemblance to my previous straight hair. My body felt like it had been run over by a truck and then dragged several miles behind it. "Here's the thing," Julia said one afternoon, sitting across from me at our kitchen table with a mug of coffee between her hands. "You've essentially missed almost 2 full years of regular schooling. None of that is your fault. You were busy beating cancer, but the reality is you're significantly behind academically on paper." "But I'm behind." I finished for her. "On paper," she repeated emphatically, "not in your brain. I've watched you devour books 3 times as fast as kids your age. I've heard you ask questions that stump presidents. I've seen you explain your own medication schedule more accurately than some new nurses can. You're sharp, Naomi, much sharper than anyone ever gave you credit for. And I absolutely refuse to let your biological parents' decision define the rest of your life." She enrolled me in an accelerated online program. She found a tutor who came to our house twice a week for math and science. She sat beside me at the dining table late into the night, reading nursing journals while I worked my way through algebra, then geometry, then calculus. One night, close to midnight, I looked up and caught her nodding off over my physics textbook. "Why are you doing all this?" I asked. "You work all day. You're exhausted. Why not just let me get through school at a regular pace?" She blinked herself awake and looked at me like the answer was the most obvious thing in the world. "Because someone once told you that you weren't worth investing in," she said. "They told you that you were average, that saving your life wasn't a good use of money or resources. They were wrong. So wrong that it makes me physically angry to think about it. I am going to spend the rest of my life proving them wrong if I have to. And so are you." By 16, I had caught up to my grade level. By 17, I was ahead of it. Our small house was perpetually filled with textbooks, color-coded post-it notes, and the constant comforting smell of coffee. On weekends, when I wasn't studying, Julia took me out into the world. Museums with free admission days, cheap outdoor concerts in the park, a used bookstore where the elderly owner started setting aside medical biographies and science books just for me. She also insisted that I see a therapist weekly. Surviving isn't the same as healing, she would say. Your body is getting better, but your heart and your mind need attention too. Slowly, gradually, the nightmares became less frequent. The panic that seized me whenever someone casually mentioned their parents began to quiet. I started to believe that I might actually deserve good things. When I was 18, Dr. Chen shook my hand in the oncology clinic and said, 5 years out with no recurrence, we can officially declare you in full remission. Go live your life. Dr. Future Somebody. Julia took me to a tiny Italian restaurant that night to celebrate. Over lasagna and garlic bread, she handed me another small box. Inside was a simple silver ring with 2 stones set side by side, 1 teal and 1 purple. Your birthstone, she said, pointing to one, and mine. When you're on call at 3 in the morning, in some hospital miles away from here, running on no sleep and too much coffee, I want you to look at this ring and remember that you still have a mom in your corner. Always. I wore it every single day. By my senior year of high school, my grades were nearly perfect. I had fallen completely in love with biology, chemistry, and every class that touched on how the human body worked. I think I want to be a doctor, I told Julia one evening. Pediatric oncology specifically, like Dr. Chen. I want to be the person I needed when I was 13, the kind of doctor you helped me believe existed. Her eyes filled immediately with tears. Then that's exactly what you're going to do. I started researching pre-med programs obsessively. One name kept appearing at the top of every list. Westbridge University, top-tier science programs, an incredible affiliated medical school, and a price tag that seemed impossibly out of reach. I want to apply to Westbridge, I said quietly one night, almost embarrassed, like I was asking for something I had no right to want. Then we're applying to Westbridge, Julia said, already opening her laptop, and we're going to get you in. We spent countless evenings working on my personal statement together. I would write in my halting, uncertain way, and Julia would hand me tissues when I hit the parts about the hospital and my parents. And then she would gently suggest where I could be more specific, more honest, more myself. In March of my senior year, I opened an email from Westbridge University and screamed so loudly that Moki fled the room in terror. Full acceptance, a substantial scholarship, grants, manageable loans. Between all of it, the impossible tuition had become somehow possible. Julia was crying before I even finished reading her the letter. I told you, she kept saying through her tears. I told you that you were never average. I told you, for years, at Westbridge were simultaneously the hardest and best of my life. I buried myself in laboratory work, study groups, and volunteer shifts at the children's hospital near campus. Organic chemistry tried to break me. Physics came for my sanity. I called Julia almost every night, sometimes to vent frustrations about grades, sometimes just to hear her voice on the other end of the line. You beat leukemia. She would remind me whenever I was ready to give up. You can absolutely beat organic chemistry. During my sophomore year winter break, I came home and noticed that Julia looked thinner than I remembered. There were dark circles under her eyes that hadn't been there before. She looked exhausted in a way that went beyond normal tiredness. Are you okay? I asked. Are you sick? I'm fine, she said, much too quickly. Just picking up some extra shifts at the hospital so you don't have to stress about rent or textbooks. Nothing to worry about. Later, I discovered the truth. She had been working 50 to 60 hours every week, accepting every overtime shift that became available. Not because I had asked her to, because she never wanted me to have to choose between buying a textbook and eating dinner, because she wanted me to focus completely on my future. By the time I graduated from Westbridge, I was at the very top of my class, with extensive research experience, and recommendation letters that made me cry when I read what my professors had written about me. Westbridge School of Medicine accepted me. For more years, I told Julia over the phone, laughing and crying simultaneously. Then you're going to have to start calling me Dr. Rivera. I've been calling you that in my head for years, she said. I am so incredibly proud of you, Naomi. Your biological parents have absolutely no idea what they gave away. They lost me, I said, and I got you. I won. Medical school was brutal in ways I hadn't anticipated. Endless lectures, anatomy lab, nights on call when sleep became a distant memory, children who reminded me of myself at 13. Hooked up to chemotherapy, brave and terrified at the same time, I chose pediatric oncology as my specialty without a moment's hesitation. Julia drove up for my white coat ceremony. She cried openly when I slipped into that starched white coat with my name embroidered on the pocket. She came for every major milestone she could afford to travel for. My first day of clinical rotations, the day I found out I had matched into a top pediatric oncology residency. Every triumph along the way. In all those years, I never heard a single word from my biological parents. No phone calls, no letters, no emails, nothing. I assumed they had erased me from their lives as efficiently as they had erased me from their financial plans. I was wrong. In my final year of medical school, I received an email from the dean's office that I had to read 3 times before the words made sense. I had been selected as valedictorian of my graduating class. Number 1 academically, outstanding clinical evaluations, significant research contributions. I called Julia the second my hands stopped shaking. Mom, I said, because somewhere around my second year of college she had gently asked if I might be comfortable calling her that, and I had replied that she had been my mom for years, and I was just finally catching up with the truth of it. Mom, they picked me. I'm the valedictorian. I had to hold the phone away from my ear as she screamed with joy. You're giving the graduation speech, she asked breathlessly. Yeah, to the whole university. Oh, Naomi, they're going to need to distribute tissues at the doors. Your classmates have no idea what's coming. Graduation was scheduled for June 4th at the downtown Civic Arena. Thousands of people would be there. Graduates from every program, medicine, nursing, public health. A couple of weeks before the ceremony, I received an administrative email from the events coordination office. As valedictorian, you are entitled to additional reserved seats for guests. Please confirm the names of the individuals you wish to include in your primary section. I immediately listed Julia, along with 6 people who had become my aunts and uncles over the years. Julia's closest friends, who had been present for every birthday, every chemo anniversary, every milestone that mattered. To hours later, another email appeared in my inbox. We have received a request from individuals identifying themselves as your parents, Carol and David Ellis, requesting inclusion in your reserved section. Please confirm whether you authorized this request. For a long time, I sat motionless, staring at the screen. Carol and David Ellis, names I hadn't spoken aloud in years. The people who had calculated the value of my life and found me not worth the investment. The people who had walked away while I was still in a hospital bed. I called Julia. They want to come, I said. She was quiet for a moment. How does that make you feel? Angry, I said, confused, and weirdly curious. Part of me wants security to physically remove them from the building. Part of me wants them to sit there and watch me walk across that stage and know exactly what they threw away. It's your day, she said carefully. Whatever you decide, I'm completely behind you. But if you want my honest opinion, I do. Let them come, she said. Let them sit in that audience and watch their daughter in her white coat. Let them see the child they tried to abandon standing on a stage they contributed nothing to, being celebrated for achievements they didn't support, next to the mother who actually raised her. I thought about that for a long time. Then I replied to the email, yes, add them to my reserved section. June 4th was bright and oppressively hot. The arena buzzed with thousands of people, families holding homemade signs, children fidgeting in their seats, faculty members sweating in their ceremonial regalia. We graduates lined up backstage in our black gowns and caps, white coats layered on top, honor cords tangling round our necks like badges of survival. A harried event coordinator approached me. Dr. Rivera, she said, and they were already calling us doctor even though it wouldn't be official for another hour. Your guests are seated in section row 3. Thank you, I said. I'm ready. We processed into the arena to the familiar strains of pomp and circumstance. Cameras flashed everywhere. People cheered. I scanned the crowd until I found my section. Julia sat in the first reserved seat, wearing a beautiful blue dress she had bought specifically for this occasion, clutching a bouquet of sunflowers and lilies. Her friends flanked her on both sides, all of them beaming, several already crying, and 2 seats away from Julia, I saw them. My biological parents. My mother looked older, diminished somehow. The blonde hair I remembered was now heavily threaded with gray. My father had developed a soft stomach and significantly less hair than I recalled. They looked like ordinary, aging people you might pass on any street without noticing. Not the monsters who had inhabited my nightmares for years. Just flawed, small, human beings who had made an unforgivable choice. They weren't looking at me. They were studying their programs, lips moving as they read through the names. Maybe they were searching for their last name. Maybe they expected to see Dr. Ellis listed somewhere in the program. They hadn't connected Naomi Rivera to the daughter they had abandoned. The ceremony proceeded. Speeches from the university president, the various deans. A famous medical researcher reminded us to be compassionate, curious, and ethical in our practice. Then the dean of the medical school stepped up to the main podium. And now, she announced, it is my distinct honor to introduce the students selected by faculty and administration to represent the Westbridge University School of Medicine class of 2027. She has demonstrated excellence in every domain: academics, clinical care, and groundbreaking research in pediatric oncology. Please welcome Dr. Naomi Rivera. The applause crashed over me like a wave. I rose from my seat. My legs felt distant and unsteady as I climbed the steps to the stage. I saw Julia spring to her feet instantly, clapping so hard her bouquet was shaking, tears already streaming down her cheeks. I also saw my biological parents freeze. My father's jaw dropped open. My mother's hand flew to cover her mouth. They had finally realized who I was. I reached the podium, adjusted the microphone to my height, and looked out at what felt like an endless sea of faces. Thank you, Dean Harper, I began, and thank you to the faculty, the staff, the families, and my fellow graduates. We made it. Laughter rippled through the crowd, then settled into attentive silence. When I was 13 years old, I said, I learned 2 things in the span of a single hour. I learned that I had leukemia, and I learned that my parents didn't believe I was worth the cost of treatment. I felt the air in the arena change. Thousands of people held their breath. I remember sitting in a hospital examination room, wearing an uncomfortable paper gown, while a doctor carefully explained my treatment options. He talked about survival rates and side effects and how challenging the journey ahead would be. And then the conversation turned to money, and my parents decided, with me sitting right there listening to every word, that my life was simply too expensive to save. I let that statement hang in the silence. They had another daughter, I continued, healthy, brilliant, college-bound with an Ivy League future ahead of her. They chose her future over my survival. They signed legal documents surrendering me to the state and walked away without saying goodbye. I watched the hospital room door close behind them and understood, at 13, that I was completely alone in the world. I glanced toward my section. My mother's face had gone chalk white. My father was staring fixedly at the floor. Round them, people were turning, whispering, putting the pieces together. But I wasn't alone for very long, I continued, because a nurse on the pediatric oncology floor saw more than just another cancer patient. She saw a frightened child who needed much more than chemotherapy. She saw someone who desperately needed a home. I looked directly at Julia. She didn't just hang for bags and check vital signs. She taught me card games at midnight so I wouldn't be terrified of the dark. She fought with doctors, for proper pain medication when I was too weak to advocate for myself. She brought me into her small house with its creaky stairs and her grumpy orange cat and said 7 words I will never forget. "You're safe here. I'm not going anywhere." Julia covered her face with both hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. She became my foster mother first. Then she officially adopted me. She worked double shifts for years, so I would never have to worry about textbooks or transportation. She stayed up until midnight helping me relearn algebra after chemotherapy had ravaged my ability to concentrate. She told me every single day that I was capable of so much more than average, that my life was worth fighting for. I reached up and removed my graduation cap, probably violating several ceremony protocols in the process, and held it in front of me. "This degree does not exist without her," I said. "Every single step I took to reach this stage, she walked beside me. Not the people who share my DNA, the person who chose me day after day, year after year." I turned back to face the full audience. "To the people who surrendered me and are sitting in this audience today," I said. The arena went absolutely silent. "Thank you for making it so abundantly clear that biology is not the same as family. Thank you for stepping aside and creating space for someone infinitely better to step in. You taught me exactly what I never want to become." I heard murmuring ripple through the rows. My mother's shoulders shook. My father's face had turned a dark, humiliated red. "And my mother," I said, and my voice caught on the word. "To the woman who filled out mountains of paperwork and slept in plastic hospital chairs and worked herself to exhaustion so I could stand on this stage today. This achievement is yours as much as it is mine. You gave me a life that no scholarship or diploma could ever measure. I love you. Thank you for choosing me." The arena erupted. People rose to their feet. I saw several of my professors openly wiping their eyes, but I could only see Julia, half standing and half collapsed because it looked like her legs might give out, crying unrestrainedly into her bouquet. We mouthed "I love you" back and forth across the crowded arena. I finished the remainder of my prepared speech, the parts about our responsibilities as physicians, about truly listening to our patients, about remembering that behind every medical chart is an entire universe of human experience. But everyone present understood that the real speech had already been delivered. After the ceremony concluded, I was immediately engulfed by crowds of people. Classmates embraced me. Attending physicians clapped me on the back. Complete strangers thanked me for having the courage to say what I had said. Eventually, I spotted Julia bulldozing through the crowd with single-minded determination, her friends trailing in her wake. We collided in the middle of the reception hall and held onto each other. "You didn't have to do that." She sobbed into my shoulder. "Yes," I said into hers. "I absolutely did, because every word of it was true." The dean approached for photographs. A local television crew asked permission to broadcast segments of my speech. Julia remained glued to my side, just as she had been when I first learned to walk again after chemotherapy. Across the reception hall, I noticed my biological parents. They stood completely alone. A visible perimeter of empty space surrounded them. No one approached them. My mother looked like she desperately wanted to come over, but couldn't command her feet to move. My father's mouth was compressed into a thin line of fury and humiliation. They left without speaking to me, without attempting to explain or apologize or justify. They simply walked out. 2 days later, the voicemails began. "Naomi, it's Mom." My mother's voice quavered on the recording. "We saw you at graduation. You were absolutely incredible. We're so proud of everything you've accomplished. We were young back then. We panicked. We made a terrible mistake. We thought perhaps we could talk about it now. We're in a very difficult situation at the moment. We're about to lose our house. Hannah can't help us anymore. Maybe you could give us a call." I pressed delete without hesitation. An email arrived from my father. "You had absolutely no right to humiliate us like that in a public forum. We made the best decision we could with the information available to us at the time. Obviously, things worked out perfectly well for you, so we couldn't have been as terrible as you made us sound. We are still your biological parents. You owe us at least a conversation. Call us immediately. I did not call. Over the following 2 weeks, they attempted contact nearly 50 times. Phone calls, emails, Facebook messages from accounts I didn't know existed. Every message blended guilt, entitlement, and increasingly naked desperation. I learned the details of their situation later, through a chain of people who had stayed connected to my sister. Hannah had indeed attended an Ivy League university. She had graduated from a prestigious law school. She had secured a high-paying position at a prominent corporate firm. She had married a man who worked in finance. My parents had poured everything they possessed into her trajectory: the college fund, their retirement savings, even a second mortgage to help Hannah and her husband purchase an impressive house in an expensive neighborhood. Then Hannah's husband was arrested for securities fraud. He went to federal prison. The scandal was covered in financial news outlets. Hannah lost her position. The house was seized by federal authorities. She severed contact with our parents after they repeatedly requested money she no longer had. So my biological parents had attended my graduation as a desperate final gamble. Perhaps their discarded daughter had somehow landed on her feet. Perhaps she could be convinced to become their retirement plan now that their investment in Hannah had collapsed. Instead, they had been publicly identified as the parents who had abandoned a child with cancer. On the 15th day, after receiving one particularly manipulative email, I finally responded. When I was 13 years old, I wrote, "You told me I wasn't worth the price of my own medical treatment. You told me that Hannah had genuine potential and I did not. You signed legal papers surrendering me to state custody while I was lying in a hospital bed. You didn't call during my chemotherapy. You didn't attend my adoption hearing. You didn't reach out when I went into remission. Julia Rivera became my family. She earned the right to be called my mother through years of sacrifice and love. You did not. I do not owe you money. I do not owe you time. I do not owe you emotional labor. I owe you nothing at all. Do not contact me again." Then I blocked every phone number and email address they had ever used to reach me. That was 3 years ago. I'm 32 now, completing a fellowship in pediatric oncology at Great Lakes Children's Hospital in Chicago. I spend my days walking into rooms that smell like antiseptic and barely concealed fear. I sit on the edges of children's beds and explain terrifying words like leukemia in ways their young minds can actually comprehend and hold. I look parents in the eyes and tell them difficult truths, especially when those truths are hard to hear. Sometimes I observe a mother sobbing in a hospital visitor's chair and I think to myself, Julia would have brought her coffee. And then I do exactly that. Julia still lives in the same small house on Willow Ridge Drive. She works part-time at Northside Children's Hospital now. Moki is elderly and even more temperamental, but somehow still alive. We communicate every single day through texts, phone calls, and an ongoing exchange of ridiculous memes. She visits Chicago whenever she can arrange the time. I go home to her whenever there's a long enough gap between rotations. She's my mother. She is my best friend. She is the fixed point around which my entire life orbits. Through mutual acquaintances, I occasionally hear fragments of information about my biological family. My parents lost their house. They rent a small apartment now and subsist primarily on Social Security. Hannah relocated across the country, legally changed her surname, and stopped returning their phone calls. When I hear these updates, I feel nothing. Not satisfaction, not revenge, just distance. The vast, uncrossable distance of years and choices. They made their decision in a sterile hospital examination room when I was 13 years old. I made mine on a graduation stage when I was 20-9. If anyone asks whether I would change anything about what I said in that speech, the answer is no. It was never about revenge or inflicting pain. It was about speaking truth out loud. It was about honoring the woman who gathered every shattered piece of my life and stayed present long enough to help me reassemble them into something whole. It was about giving voice to every child who has ever been told they weren't worth the effort of Saving, if you're hearing this and you've experienced abandonment, if you've been dismissed or told you're too much trouble or simply not enough to fight for, please understand something. They were wrong. Your value is not determined by people who lack the capacity to see it. Your potential is not limited by someone else's failure of imagination. Family is not merely the people who share your genetic material. Family is the people who show up over and over again when it's inconvenient, when it costs them time and money and sleep and comfort. Find those people, your Julias, your chosen siblings, your found aunts and uncles, and then, slowly and stubbornly, build a life so full and meaningful and powerful that the people who discarded you wouldn't recognize you if they passed you on the street. My name is Dr. Naomi Rivera. I survived cancer. I became the same kind of physician who once stood at the foot of my hospital bed and said, "We'll fight this together." I accomplished all of this without the people who decided I wasn't worth saving. That isn't revenge. That's just a stot. And Mom, Julia, if you're watching this right now, probably with a box of tissues in your lap and Moki demanding attention beside you, thank you for every exhausting shift you worked, for every mile you drove, for every form you completed, for every time you said, "I'm not going anywhere," and proved you meant it. You saved my life twice. Once from cancer, and once from believing I didn't deserve to be loved. I love you, always.